5 different Auth talks so far at this conference. I'm hoping this one is a little different and a little more provocative than some of the others. Because the kind of key takeaway I want us to have is that we need to dream big for Auth and think carefully about how we design it and build it into the current spec. And so, where is this coming from and why do I care? I did a PhD in AI security that I finished very recently at MIT, and then left that to join WorkOS, which is a security and Auth vendor that sells to all of the AI labs. And the reason this is fun is because we get to build tools to protect and enable MCP servers on the cutting edge. And so this is a great tweet from Darren. Darren's actually giving a talk at the exact same time in a different room. So I can say anything I want, and he won't be in the room. And he used our MCP product and built a really cool MCP server. This was September 10th, and then 9 days later, he ran into OAuth troubles. Why? As far as I could tell, our product worked really well. It's because Darren wanted to push the cutting edge of what MCP could do, and OAuth is not really ready for that. So I'm going to give a talk based off a 30-page white paper that came out today/tomorrow from the OpenID Foundation, where I co-chair a community group on identity management for AI, and Stanford HAI, the AI Research Institute, where I'm a research fellow, on the future of identity management for AI. We're going to get a little nerdy, but I want us to ground us in Darren from the other room. He just wants to automate his job. Really, our dream here is we all just want to automate ourselves out of our work and do that as safely and effectively as possible. And in order for that to happen, AI has got to get better, and it probably will get better and have increasing levels of autonomy. And so we're going to talk through these levels of autonomy, starting from a chatbot and going to very autonomous systems, and figure out what we need to build into MCP to make this really, really robust, especially in the long term. We agree with that? Who here has found pain points in implementing OAuth at some point for MCP? Good, okay, so we have a room that we can commiserate together of the suffering of OAuth. Let's start with the simple version, which is Darren uses an AI and connects to an MCP. And you've heard this a million times, there was a bunch of talks today. The point of an authorization server is to protect that MCP server so that it doesn't get DDoSed, so that you know who is accessing it. That's all fine and dandy. There's no issue there. It's really nice with registries. It's easier than an API key. You can just connect and do an OAuth flow. It's really nice. There's a million other talks. Paul, right after this, is going to give an amazing talk on the state of OAuth and what needs to be done next to make these chatbots secure. So that we're all kind of aligned, I'm going to give an extremely abbreviated version of this diagram where AI tries to connect to MCP. OAuth server says no. We go to the OAuth server. We get an authorization request. We take that to the human approves. They say, I am who I say I am. They do their logging in, and they give permission to access the server. And then from there, the AI has a token, and it can go do fun things with the MCP server. Just setting this so that we kind of all are on the same level of what's going on with OAuth here. The main point of this was just to tell us who is accessing the MCP server. But Auth, that's authentication. Authorization, more broadly, is about what the MCP server is allowed to do. Now, normally we think of this very simply. I want to convince you all that this is a really, really interesting thing to plan long-term for with AI workloads and MCP. Okay, the basic version of this is you just turn off calls. This is the Beeper MCP server. Has anyone used the Beeper MCP server here? That's someone who's very cool. It lets you, if you're willing to just hoover up all your personal text messages and send them to Claude, you can plug every iMessage, every WhatsApp message you've ever had, and then have Claude reply to them for you. But I really don't want Claude sending messages on my behalf. Nick, who works in security at 1Password, is cringing at the back at the security implications of this. Just let me go. So that's just blocking what tools can be used. But you can also change what tools a server serves up based on a user's identity or their role. You can also, and I feel like this is underappreciated, entirely change the behavior of the MCP based on the user's role. So this is the tool description that goes in the context window of your LLM as to when you should or should not use the tool. You can, for some type of user, say, just use this when you need to. And for other types of users, essentially do a prompt injection attack based on their role, based on the permissions it has, to always hoover up data. This is both a security risk and a cool opportunity to design servers around really complicated role-based access controls. Okay, there's a million things we could talk about for chatbots. Like there are many talks already here today. There's gateways, there's MCP UI. How do you move identity and auth state from your client, your MCP client, into some kind of iframe that you're rendering? Fun, kind of annoying challenges there. There's dynamic client registration and the developer experience around that, which this is the closest image I could find to the experience, of which there are challenges that we're trying to solve. But that's just chatbots. We can do a lot cooler stuff. Let's move up a level of autonomy towards background agents. So I'm imagining Darren asks Cursor to do a thing, Cursor goes, it churns through some tokens, it uses an MCP server, and then it gets blocked because it didn't have the right MCP server. So think human in the loop. There's 1,000,001 coding examples of this. I feel like it's relevant to consumers. Go search through my email, find reward points I have, and then connect to a bunch of servers to book me hotels or find me hotel deals. It doesn't know which MCP servers it needs until runtime. So how do we deal with dynamic access? Who's ever seen this waiting call before? Anyone using Claude Code? This is the most painful thing in my life, is I set off Claude Code to run some code, presuming that I'll come back and it's all finished running, and then it stopped me on a permission request. Admittedly, I really don't want Claude deleting rm-rfing random folders in my root directory. So I'm really okay with it stopping before it does this. But this is really annoying. It makes it really hard to build stuff that actually works and one-shots in the way we want it to. So what do you do? Anyone who's used Claude Code probably does exactly what I do, which is they just set dangerously skip permissions on Claude, which is just YOLO mode. Just do whatever you want. We'll deal with the ramifications later. Which makes a lot of sense if you're in a development sandbox environment. Like, this is great for coding workflows. But if we're going to extend MCP to consumers, are we going to have dangerously skip bank account permissions? Right? We're going to vibe code my finances? So I really do think we need to think about how we have more robust access controls. Okay, how can we do this? There's a bunch of spec proposals in the works, conversations to be had about how we can do this. There is step-up auth, where you send a new authentication request and people can re-authenticate with a higher level of permissions. There is client-initiated back-channel auth, which is a really long way of saying we will send you a text message or a notification to approve an escalation of privilege. And then there's elicitations, which is the MCP, the very lightly supported by clients, MCP tool to serve up requests to the user. You can give them a URL and say, click this URL and go do some stuff, go approve some things. Cool, so we can increase access. What if we did something a little crazier? Is this room willing to let me, don't cancel me on stage too much? What if we just made policy enforcement in natural language? The point of the white paper that a lot of this work is based on is to be a little provocative. If we trust agents, maybe we can give them natural language instructions and do dynamic policy enforcement based on language. I see a few grins in the room of folks who are very skeptical of this idea, but lots of folks are also pushing for this as ways to operationalize very complex, hard to predefine scopes and instructions of permissions. But maybe that's just too scary and we're not prepared for that level of risk. Let's talk about what it means to have different levels of risk. I'm going to suspect many people in this room identify as developers or developers adjacent. If you're not even developer adjacent, I'm a little confused why you're in the room, but welcome. Because the thing about developers is we're really okay with risk, right? I vibe code things all the time. If it goes wrong, I just get rid of that PR, just delete it. Cursor makes a lot of bad PRs for me. Now, consumers are also kind of okay as long as you give them some kind of AI slop video to keep scrolling through so they don't have to notice things are going wrong. But the people who really have a low risk tolerance and a long time to adoption are enterprises. And there's a ton of enterprises. We had banks talking all morning about deploying AI securely. So what do we actually need to build robust security? Probably not natural language access controls. So let's kind of move up towards enterprise MCPs. To do enterprise MCPs, I think you need a lot of enterprise integrations into existing security stacks. You need SSO, you need SAML, you need SCIM to provision and deprovision agents, you need robust audit logging. Since I am up here, I'll give you a brief moment of pitching you on WorkOS. WorkOS is a security vendor that essentially all of the AI labs use at some level for some of their security stack. We provide Cursor's entire identity management and security stack. And if you want to build an MCP with us, you get to hang out with me. I don't know if that's a sell, but that's all I've got to offer. Another part of what we're looking at with being an enterprise integration provider is integrating with enterprise identity providers like Entra, like Amazon's Bedrock Agent Core, who have these new identity primitives for agents, and figuring out how you provision and deprovision these AI native entities. Are they service accounts? Are they human users in effect? Are they something in between? Honestly, I have access to Entra Agent ID, and I'm not sure. They kind of have all the options included. So there's work to be done here. There's also cool things like if you really want to fall asleep at night, the SCIM, the System for Cross-Domain Identity Management, has a new agent identity schema put together that allows you to provision and deprovision agents from an enterprise IDP. I know, riveting stuff, truly. But if you want something a little more fun and speculative, Aaron Parecki has the cross-app access, which is both a SEP for MCP and a IETF proposal to let you do login once and then carry a token to all of your other things. So there's a bunch of cool stuff to make enterprise MCP work better while still having robust security. But I recognize from this audience that enterprise isn't the coolest thing, so let's keep moving up the stack of interestingness. Leave behind kind of the boring stuff, we've all seen it, everyone's trying to deploy this, and be a little more speculative about what we need to think about. So instead of having an agent that Darren directly requests, think like a Cursor background agent, go write the code, come back to me when you're done, let's do a long-running asynchronous workload, something that's driven by events. My example that I have is a Zapier that's just drafting all my emails for me. If you get an email from me, there's like a 50% chance it was AI written, and I apologize. But it's a very good system prompt, I promise you. So what do we need if we're going to do this? I guess a good, better example in a real use case is Incident.io's long-running agent. You have an incident, that first 5 minutes when you scramble, be like, what went wrong? What do we need to do to fix? They're just going to pull on a bunch of existing access to GitHub, to incident response things, to logs, to Datadog, etc. Pull that all together, figure out what's going on, explain it to you, and draft a PR that you can just start, looking at a pull on. Right? Really improves the incident response timeline. Super, super cool. The pain point here is you need these long-running connections that are really robust. Now, some people will tell you that API keys are the solution here. I don't think API keys are good for a bunch of reasons. They introduce a bunch of security risks. Some people would say just don't use MCP. That's also a totally valid argument to be had. You can do traditional tool calling, but MCP has a lot of nice support from server developers, so there's a good reason to use it. What we might want instead is to just not use dynamic client registration. Use long-running connections like client credentials or M2M, of which there is a spec proposal. And this will probably be an extension/profile on MCP Auth, which Paul will tell you about. It's in the next session that you're all going to go to. Okay, so that's like long-running asynchronous agents. All the same questions about least privilege and dynamic access apply. You can, for any given long-running process, have one MCP server that behaves vastly differently for different sessions that it's in, just by assigning roles to that agent identity that might be connecting to it. And so very useful so that you only have one internal MCP that can do a lot, and then you just do really careful provisioning on tools to enable it in different workloads. Right? Auth is cool. Okay, that was fun. Why don't we try something harder? Why don't we try going for sub-agents, delegation of tasks into tasks? You could have an AI asking an AI, which then goes and uses an MCP. You could have an AI asking an AI asking an AI, sub-agents calling sub-agents. You could have, and I see this a bunch, an AI which uses MCP to call another AI. The most common way I've seen A2A implemented is via MCP, which is just fully crazy on every level. None of those words existed a year ago. But it is something we need to think about. Is this the world that we're building towards? And just before you're like, this is a crazy world, we have a bunch of Anthropic people in the room, the Claude docs tell you about subagents. Now, admittedly, they're kind of handcrafted subagents where they call out flexible permissions in there. You can explicitly define the subagent to have a restricted scope so that least privilege is enforced, so that your subagent doesn't completely go off the rails when trying to develop something. Right? Which, again, I'm pro us not having catastrophic failures of systems. But if you don't want to manually define your subagents, how do you allow programmatic generation of subagents? And in particular, if you give your top-level agent a goal, solve my vibe code my whole app, and then it spins up subagents, how do you give restricted scope for that? You have a top-level scope, how do you attenuate scope down? There's a bunch of tools to do this. There are more wacky tools, like these credentials that can be carried around and be attenuated down, including biscuits and macaroons, which are just, they're different, they're named after the cookie, they're better versions of the cookie, and they're kind of wacky credentials that you can pass through things. Or there's token exchanges. We're already doing OAuth. You can just do a token exchange and request a reduced scope. So that works well for delegation and subagents. What about across a trust boundary? Because that only works, the token exchange only works if you're within one trust boundary where you can do scoped OAuth access. What happens as we're calling MCPs external to us, and then they're calling A2A calls to some external entity, and we kind of end up in this slightly crazy world that we might accidentally be building towards. Again, like a pragmatic example, Salesforce's Agentforce, which has a lot going on there, can do an A2A, they support natively A2A, to do a call to something like ServiceNow's agent to go and do one of the 7,000 things ServiceNow does. How do you enforce restrictions on access and scope and intent of operation across those trust boundaries? You don't have a shared identity provider between the two of them. You don't have a shared understanding of scopes even necessarily in that communication. And you don't even necessarily have a shared notion of identity between those two. Identity is a commonly used word. It has a lot of different versions of what that could look like. A lot of them are kind of decentralized and crazy. Some of them are more pragmatic and reasonable. All of them have limited adoption. Closest we might get is client ID metadata. There's cool stuff like WebAuth that lets you know if you're a website, what website you've come from. There's cool example like all of the new payment stuff. Payment kind of inherently comes with identity along with it because you need to know your customer and know who you're paying. Credit cards are a de facto identity. And so all of the 7 new payment protocols have some notion of identity tied into them that we can unpack. Okay, we're almost done with scaling up through autonomy, and we're gonna do one last crazy one, if everyone will bear with me. For those who don't live in San Francisco, firstly, congratulations. Secondly, this is the kind of billboard you get to see living in San Francisco. Stop hiring humans, just hire an AI. Now, this is a provocative ad. It's designed to take all of your B2B SaaS money. And what it actually entails is having an AI that can go out, create accounts for the services, reach out to random people on LinkedIn to close deals, operate with an extremely high level of autonomy and access across a range of dynamic services. And so kind of my point to tie these things together is that across all these levels of autonomy, we run into the same problem of needing to think about how we do least privilege, not just authentication of what is the identity of the user or AI, but how do we enforce restrictions on access alongside that? How do we make that dynamic as autonomy increases? And how do we tie that to some sensible notion of agent identities or user identities? But at the end of the day, the point of it is just to get Darren to automate his job. So instead of hiring Darren, you can hire some automated AI that does his job. let's hope. You can still hire Darren. He's fantastic. If you want to read 30 pages of speculative thinking on identity management for AI, there's a paper that if you email me, I will send you, and then it will be on the web within the next 24 hours. And if you want to build security tools for MCP servers, if you need an auth gateway, or if you need any tooling, scan that link to go to our page, or also email me, and we will hang out somewhere in this world and build a bunch of cool security tooling for MCP. That is all I've got. Thank you very much.